Hi, my name's Leonard and welcome to the Cosmic DJ department for a special feature on live electronic music performance. Something we're asked about quite a lot, and it's how do you take your productions to a live arena? And we're going to be addressing this in a couple of different ways. We're going to be looking at taking a purely electronic based production to the live arena, and we're also going to be looking at integrating live electronics with other instruments. So a couple of platforms we're going to be looking at, mostly Ableton Live. So there are many ways which we can use Ableton Live in all forms of performance. We're also going to be taking a look at a couple more DJ based applications such as Serato Scratch Live and Tractor. So let's get straight into it, and we're going to take a look at Ableton first. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is Ableton Live. This is an extremely versatile program. You can do a lot of different things with it. You may be familiar with it as a production tool, and you can certainly produce your tracks in it, as many producers across the world do, but it's also an excellent live tool, hence the name Ableton Live. It works in a pretty strange way, a bit different to a lot of the other programs, and what you'll see on the screen is we have lots of little tiny boxes, and these are what Ableton call clips. And essentially what they are little bits of audio, or loops if you will, that you can play back in any different order that you want to. So you can select from each channel one clip that you can play. You've also got on the side here what they call scenes. So by triggering one of those, it'll play every clip along that row. So how do you go about getting audio into this? Well, if you're a producer, then you may be familiar with the term stems, and what these are the basic components of your track. So there might be a stem that might be drums, there might be a stem for synths, there might be a stem for bass lines, or you may have them all separated out, so you have a stem for kick drum, a stem for snare drum, and so on. What you can do is export all these as audio files and then load them in as clips into Ableton. Now the beauty of Ableton is as well, it analyzes all the audio that you feed it and actually syncs it to the project tempo. So if I drop into a thing here, we'll see a whole bunch of little bits of audio. This is all tempo synced via the warping feature that you get with Ableton. So you can move these things around. You can, as you can see in this one, you can select a bit of it and use only a small section of it as a loop. It's a very versatile way of working. The other thing we can do with Ableton is not just work with audio, we can also work with MIDI. So you'll see here, I've got a channel here with Arturia's Analog Factory on it, and very simply I can play the keyboard. So I can actually either play the keyboard live, or I can actually set Ableton to record, and I can record a loop live to be played back with the rest of my set. The other thing I've got loaded here is Machine as well. So let's say, for example, I was playing back one of these kick drum tracks, and I wanted to program something live with Machine as well. I can actually jump into my step sequencer, like so. So there's a snare drum I can program. See what else we've got. Let's add a hi-hat part. So I can actually program drums live over the top of what I'm doing. This is probably even more pertinent if you're not using audio loops. So you'd be able to program all your drums live, you might be able to play all your synth parts live. Another thing that's really common as well is people will typically use a microphone live, especially if you're a vocalist in this case. So what you can do is actually record vocal loops and play them back and layer things up and really get a really nice big wall of sound going, all with the functioning of just one program. So I'd just like to talk a bit more about the clips themselves now. So I've already discussed what they are and how they work. Let's talk a bit about why you'd use them, or why you need them. There's a few things that they do. The first thing is it gives you the ability to break your tracks down into basic elements and rebuild them in any order or particular fashion that you might want to. The second thing it enables you to do is to very slowly mix from one track to another, so you can introduce elements of the new track rather than just bringing the whole thing in all at once. So I'm going to show you a little bit more in detail now how we can work with this, and first I just want to talk to you a bit about the controller that I've got here. There's a lot of these different controllers on the market. The one I'm using here is the Akai APC20. And just to break down what this thing is, you'll see this whole bunch of squares here. These correspond to the different clips I've got on my screen. So this, say for example, this one here is corresponding to this button here. So if I was to press that, it'll actually start triggering that clip. A couple of other things we've got on here. We've also got things so I can stop the clips. We've got things for me to play the whole project back, to record, because there's certain things you might want to record live while you're doing this. I can navigate as well, so you'll see the orange box on my screen here. I can move this box using these arrows here, and that actually then tells me what I'm centered on, and the buttons at the top will then correspond to what's on my screen. I've also got a few buttons here to activate each track, to solo it, to record arm it, and then finally something that's very important, especially if you're not working with a mixer, is I've actually got faders, so I can change the level of all the tracks independently. I've also got a master control here. There's a couple of other things like the cue level as well, which if you're using a multi-output sound card and you want to actually cue things with your headphones, then that enables you to do that as well. So let's just take a look at how we can build up a basic sound. So I'm going to start with just a kick drum. So that's now playing from channel 1. I can now introduce a second element, and I'm going to pick a different clip here that's not in a straight line. So I've now introduced a sub bass sound. So we've got a basic groove sort of happening now. We introduce the third element, so now we've got some extra percussion. I've got my snares, my snare and my hats there as well. We'll bring in, so now I've got a synth part playing. So let's say I wanted to change tracks. How would we do this? So all I need to do is arrow up to the other track. We'll just focus on that section, and I could very slowly introduce different elements of this track. So let's try a bass line. So as you can see, it's a really subtle way of doing this. We can change percussion. So we've still got that synth lead playing from the first track. We could actually look at maybe changing that out now. And we've basically mixed between two tracks. One thing I should mention before I go any further with this as well is there's a lot of these sets available online. These ones I've actually downloaded directly from the Ableton website, and it's part of a package of minor sets. This one's by Geyser. So they're all online if you want to download them and have a look. And it's actually a really good idea to do this as well if you want to get an idea of how you can build your own live set. Definitely check out some other people's, because it'll give you some really great ideas that you can borrow. So the other great thing about these clips is that we can pretty much drop audio of any tempo into, and Ableton will automatically sync it to the tempo of your overall project. And it's done with a thing called warping. It's the technique that Ableton Live uses to get this happening. And it's actually pretty fantastic. So we can take any section of audio from any track or from any stem, drop it in there, and it's automatically going to sync to that tempo. And that means that we can mix tracks together even if they're at different tempos. So I've showed you very basically what you can do with Ableton in a live context. There's a few other things you can do with it though, which are great extras as well. So if you're a DJ, you can actually drop entire tracks into each one of these clips. It doesn't have to be just an element or a stem of a track. You can actually drop whole tracks in there and mix this way. So the way you'd do that is you might create 3 or 4 tracks, or say up to 8 if you're using one of these controllers. And each clip here can be a separate track. You would run it through Ableton's warping mechanism and make sure that all the beats are mapped properly. And then what you do is very simply, as we've done, already showed you here, you actually treat each clip as a whole track, and you can mix between anywhere from 2 to 8 tracks if we were using this controller, or even more. It's a fantastic program for doing anything where you really want to extend beyond just mixing 2 tracks. So what else can we do as well? Well, Ableton can be adapted to a number of live applications as well, incorporating other musicians. So we can send a click track, for example, out of Ableton to a drummer if we wanted to have live drums. As I've showed you with MIDI, we can actually use a keyboard to trigger sounds from Ableton. We can also do the reverse as well. So if we'd actually programmed MIDI information into Ableton, we can then send it back out to a range of outboard gear. So it really opens up for live applications. This fills a similar sort of niche to the old method with hardware sequences. So if you're used to a MPC or something similar, it works in a similar way, except we're using Ableton as the hub, and we can connect any range of outboard hardware to it. So another feature in Ableton is the MIDI clock, and we can do a few things with this as well. So the primary application for it is going to be if you want to sync any external gear to this computer. And this includes actually working with a second computer or a second performer. So what we can do is we can send clock from one computer to another, and then everything that the second person does will stay in sync with the first computer. So to paint a picture with all this, what you can now imagine is we can have multiple computers all running different software, multiple instances of Ableton if you want. We could have a live drummer, we can have other live musicians, and everything will stay in sync. It really takes an element of worry out of your live performance setup, because we know that everything you trigger electronically is going to stay in sync, and then all you have to worry about is what instruments you want to play. So one final thing you can do is to actually use two computers with only one performer, and this is a pretty common setup as well. So what we could do is we can run one computer with Ableton, we can run Machine as a plugin in Ableton, and then we can run a second computer that runs a tractor setup or something similar. And what this then gives us the ability to do is to DJ traditionally on one computer, so we're playing up to 4 tracks at once coming out of one computer, and Ableton can be used to chuck in anything that you might want. So we can program live drums in on Machine, we could trigger vocal clips from Ableton, we could trigger effects, or indeed more tracks from Ableton. So as you can see, the sky's the limit. There's really anything you can imagine is totally possible. So now we get to the exciting bit with Ableton Live, which is control. Now, something with electronic music performance is that nobody really wants to be sitting there on their computer with a mouse doing this in front of an audience. And it's not very interesting for audiences either. So the great thing is there are a range of different devices out there for which we can control Ableton and really get back to what performing is all about, which is working with an audience. So you don't have your head buried in a screen. So there's a lot of different products on the market. So the first one, we've got the Akai APC-20, and there's also an APC-40 as well that came out before this one, which is a bit bigger. It's probably about twice the size, and it has a big section of encoders on it, so you can do a lot of effects processing and what have you with all those. Another couple on the market. So Livid Instruments produced this one. This is called an OM64. And it's a very similar idea to the APC-40, so you'll see we've got the standard 64 button grid here. We also have a range of other buttons here that you can map to do whatever you want. We've also got 8 faders, similar to what we've got on the APC-20, and we've got a row of 4 encoders here and then another 12 on the other side. So these things do come with their basic map already, but you can customize this to do whatever you want. So other things we can look at as well. For example, Machine has a script so that you can use it with Ableton Live. So it's very easy to have, you can still have your Machine plugin running in your session as well, and all you do is hit Shift and Control, and we jump into MIDI control mode, and then you can use the Machine pads to trigger clips. You have all the knobs here to trigger effects or to change volumes or to do whatever you want. So, and again, you can get in here and customize that and program it and set it up for your purpose. So another thing we can use are keyboards. I mentioned this a bit earlier. We can use the keyboard to actually play back sounds from Ableton. We can use it to record loops. We also have, obviously, on this keyboard a range of encoders and faders, and we can use that to control any particular element we might want from Ableton. So probably the most exciting one of recent times is the iPad. And you'll see here, I've got an iPad set up here, which is actually controlling my live set totally wirelessly. So I can trigger clips. I can do things like adjust pan, I can go here and actually add reverb. So if I've got send set up. So there are heaps of options with this. This is probably the most totally integrated solution on the market at this point, because it means you don't really have to look at your computer at all. Everything is contained on the screen here. So this is a really great device if you want to get some hands-on control. I should mention the app we're using here is one called Touchable, but there are lots of different ones on the market, so just have a bit of a research and see what works best for you. So another thing that Ableton Live can do is that it can integrate with another manufacturer's software, which is Serato Scratch Live. So just to go through the setup I've got running here, I'm using an Allen & Heath Zone DB2 mixer. I've got a Numax TTX turntable here. I've still got my Akai APC-20, and I've also got a Rain SL1. You can either use this, you can use this with any of the SL boxes, or indeed the Rain mixers that have the integrated Serato Scratch Live built into them. So what can you do with this? Well, there's 2 primary reasons I think you would go for this. The first one is it enables you to integrate your Ableton Live sets with a traditional mixing setup. And the other way of thinking about it is it enables you to scratch or do any sort of turntablist action over the top of an Ableton Live set. So let's just take a look at how this system works. So just to show you a little bit about how I've got my computer set up, you'll notice I'm still running in the background here Ableton Live, and we're still running with the same set that we were using previously, but I'm also now running Serato Scratch Live. And you'll notice if I show you down the bottom of my browser, I've got the Ableton Live set showing up as a track, which I can then drag onto one of these decks, which I've already done, and you'll then see it active there. So what happens is when I actually play my record, that set will begin. And we can do a couple of extra things here as well. You'll see I can actually push it or pull it, and it comes with me. It's exactly like playing a record or playing a track with Scratch Live. I can also move the pitch, so I can speed it up, I can slow it right down. So I can pretty much do anything that you would do with a record. So to get this into actual application, it's probably best to see it with another track playing. I've got one here, I'm just going to play back in internal mode, straight out of Scratch Live. And then I'm just going to bring in this other track here. Alright, so what I'm actually doing now is I've now got my track playing from one deck, and I've actually got an Ableton Live set playing out of the second deck. So if I pull that down, you'll hear this is the set that we were working with earlier on. And I can still do things like I could do with Ableton before, so I can change what clips are playing straight out of Ableton. Introduce other elements. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm actually mixing with a whole set and another track. So as I mentioned before, the other application for this is you could use this in the opposite way, which is to think about it as an Ableton Live set with the ability to introduce other elements from a record. So you might be able to just mix other tracks over the top of your live set, or indeed you may want to use this to introduce some scratches to your set. So this tool is going to be of particular use to hip-hop DJs who want to introduce some of their productions into a DJ set, or indeed if you want to take your existing live sets and introduce some more live elements such as scratching. And the other thing that it does is it introduces a lot more flexibility into working with Ableton Live. Probably the biggest criticism of Live is that you can't really do a lot on the fly. You have to really carefully consider and pre-prepare all of your material. What this gives you the ability to do is still use your live set as you may want to, but you can drop any track you can imagine straight over the top without having to pre-prepare it and warp it. So finally I want to talk to you about Traktor and the different things you can do with that, because it's not just a DJ program. Traktor's very versatile. You can use it in a number of different ways. So in the DJ sort of field, you can use it with timecode, either with CDs or vinyl. You can also just use it with a range of controllers, but what I'm going to look at today is how Traktor can integrate with other bits of software and indeed other bits of hardware. So essentially Traktor is a DJ program, so what it's going to do very well is take whole tracks and play them back and enable you to mix them together. You can also use it in the context of using stems, so the same way as you can with Ableton Live. So you could bounce out all the individual stems of your tracks and use them in Traktor. So just to go into the setup that I'm running here. First of all, I've got my mixer. This is an Allen & Heath Zone DB2, same as I was using before. And the difference is this time I'm actually using this as a sound card as well. So what I can do is I can route audio from Traktor straight into the channels on this mixer. So I'm also using a Traktor Control X1 by Native Instruments, and I'm only using one of these. You can actually pair them up and use two, and that would give me 4 decks of control. But for the purposes of today's demo, I'm just using one. So what I've got is track 1 running in on the first channel, coming straight out of Traktor. I've got the second track running into track 2 here, and then I'm running a couple of other things on the third track, which I'll get into in just a bit. So in the software, you'll see I'm only running 2 decks here. Now, I'm just going to show you this. I'm not going to actually demo it, but I'll just tell you a bit about it. Another thing we can do is enable the third and fourth decks, and this gives us 2 options. So we can either run 4 decks, if I just have these all set up as track decks, I can just run another 2 tracks. And then a new feature to Traktor 2.5 is the remix deck. So we'll actually be doing another video on this very shortly, so please tune in for that one. But what I can do here is similar to Ableton Live. I can load in loops, samples, whatever I want, and they'll sync to my Traktor, the main tempo of Traktor. So I don't have to worry about trying to keep things in time. Everything will lock in to a master clock source, which comes from Traktor. So just to unclutter the screen, I'll just get rid of these. So what else are we doing here? Well, I'm actually using Ableton Live again, and what I'm doing is I'm syncing Ableton to Traktor. So anything I play out of Traktor, Ableton will stay with it. So you'll see if I just check my other screen here, I've got Ableton Live running, and I'm running Machine off here as well. So the final controller you can see here is the Machine controller. So I'm using that as well as a plugin inside Ableton. So we're already getting pretty in depth here. You can see this is a really versatile setup. So let's have a look what's different in Ableton this time. So you'll see I've got this EXT light enabled here, and that means that Ableton is looking for a clock source that's external. So if I jump into my preferences, what you'll see here is I'm actually got an input here which is showing up as Traktor virtual output, and that means that Traktor's sending its clock within just the software straight to Ableton, which is now staying perfectly in sync. So let's just take a look at how this will actually work in practice. So I've got my Machine controller here controlling Machine. I could also use this to control Ableton as well if I set that up to do so. I've still got my Akai APC20 functioning here as well. And the way I'm using this is a little bit different because all the extra drums I'm going to be producing will be coming straight from Machine, so I'm not going to worry about loading in a lot of extra loops. And I've got this instead triggering, say, extra effect sounds like cymbals, white noise. I've got a couple of extra loops in here as well, which we'll get to. So let's get some sound going. We'll go back to Traktor. I'm going to start my first track playing and just make sure this is all set up and working. Just going to bring Machine back as well. So this is ready to go. So what I can do is actually start programming stuff in. So I'm introducing a hi-hat sound there. So one thing I actually am noticing is I'm 1 beat out of time, which can happen, but luckily with Traktor it's very, very easy to fix. So we'll just skip forward a beat and everything's perfect again. So as you can see, I can program anything over the top. I can also maybe add in some extra effects. Like so, I can just have a hit there. Or I've got some loops here as well, I could introduce those. So I've got a loop introduced now. I can start bringing in my second track as well if I want from Traktor. So now I've got 3 elements going. And bearing in mind, anything I want to introduce from Ableton, you can do this. You can put any sound that you want into one of these clips. I've still got Machine going. The other potential I've got here is for effects as well. I can run Machine as an effects processor. I can also load effects into Machine, so I'll just do that very briefly now. So if we just jump over back to normal control mode, I'm going to add an effect onto my master channel here. So we'll go to Browse, we're in Effects. I want Factory Effects. I'm just going to introduce one that's actually really obvious so you can hear what it does. So that's a distortion plugin. So we've got heaps of potential here and different things we can explore. This really comes into its own, if I just get all this to stop. This really comes into its own if we introduce a 3rd and 4th deck as well with Traktor. So you can really think about you're playing four tracks at once, plus introducing live drums. We've got effects and other sounds that we can introduce here. And as I mentioned before, with the new remix decks, it really opens this all up all over again. We can now have endless numbers of samples and loops all getting triggered all at once. You can have any combination of track decks and remix decks. This is really, for me, the way forward in the future, especially in the minimal techno area. It's absolutely phenomenal setup, so yeah, definitely keep that in mind if you're looking to get into some live performance.